Everyone in Seoul's Gangnam district knew one rule: never look Goliath in the eyes. The Korean Mafia boss's 150 cane Corso had shattered steel chains, hospitalized 3 trainers, and torn through reinforced doors like paper. No one could approach him without backup, not even Sang-soo Yeom himself. So when a bright yellow dress appeared in the driveway that Tuesday afternoon, every bodyguard reached for their weapon. Goliath's head snapped up, his muscles coiled. That low, bone-rattling growl that made rival gangs turn around echoed off the brick mansion walls. The little black girl, couldn't have been more than 8 years old, stood directly in the beast's path. Guards shouted in Korean for her to run. Sang-soo dropped his phone mid-sentence, veins bulging as he fought to hold the leather leash. But Amanda didn't move. She didn't scream. She just stared at the pitch-black monster and whispered 5 words no one else could hear. Goliath's snarl died in his throat. His scarred ears twitched forward. And then, in a moment that made a roomful of killers collectively hold their breath, the most dangerous dog in Seoul dropped flat to his belly and crawled toward her like a puppy begging forgiveness. Sang-soo felt his grip on the leash go slack. He'd buried men alive, watched empires burn, survived 3 assassination attempts, but he had never seen his weapon obey anyone, especially not a child in a yellow sundress clutching a worn backpack. What she pulled out of that backpack didn't just shock the Korean underworld. It made a ruthless crime lord question everything he thought he knew about monsters. Stay until the end, because the secret connection between this 8-year-old girl and the unkillable beast will destroy you. Before we dive in, drop a comment telling me, would you approach a snarling attack dog to save it? And hit subscribe, because this story gets darker before it gets beautiful. Now let's go back to where it all started. The Yeom compound sat in the heart of Gangnam, hidden behind 15-foot concrete walls embedded with broken glass and cameras that tracked heat signatures, not just movement. Inside, black marble floors reflected floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a courtyard where nothing grew. Sang-soo preferred stone to life. The 35-year-old boss had built his empire on calculated brutality and ice-cold precision. His dragon tattoos weren't decorations. They were a warning. Politicians deleted his texts after reading them. Prosecutors lost evidence. Rival syndicates knew his territory was untouchable. But there was one thing in Sang-soo's fortress he couldn't control. Goliath had arrived 4 years ago, a gift from a Russian arms dealer who thought the notorious Dragon of Seoul needed a psychological weapon. The jet-black cane Corso weighed more than most women and had a bite force that could crush bone. From day 1, the dog was feral. The first trainer quit after Goliath dragged him across the courtyard by his jacket, leaving claw marks in the stone. The second made it through 1 session before the beast snapped a steel-reinforced chain and chased him through the garden. By the time the 4th trainer refused to return, word spread through Korea's underground. Goliath wasn't just aggressive. He was broken. The dog destroyed custom furniture worth tens of thousands. He bit through a mahogany door when a maid walked past too loudly. His bark alone sent new recruits scrambling for cover. Even Sang-soo kept distance. The crime lord had tried everything. Sedatives that barely slowed him down. Shock collars Goliath learned to short-circuit against metal fixtures. Behaviorists who tripled their rates, then quit anyway. Nothing worked. Goliath ruled the east driveway like a demon guarding hell. Staff planned routes to avoid his territory. Visiting associates were escorted through side entrances. New guards received one warning. The dog doesn't know loyalty. He only knows rage. The beast had become Sang-soo's most humiliating weakness. Here was a man who controlled half of Seoul's underground economy, who could disappear enemies with a text message, who had politicians on speed dial. Yet he couldn't tame one dog, but Sang-soo refused to put Goliath down. Beneath the tailored suits and cold calculations, something in the dog's vicious independence resonated. Goliath bowed to no one, trusted nothing, and attacked anything that threatened his space. In a twisted way, Sang-soo saw himself in that rage. So the beast stayed. A 150 Seoul's reminder that even dragons have limits. The household learned to function around the tension. Sang-soo's head of security, Ki-jun, made sure raw meat was delivered twice daily, always slid through a slot in the reinforced gate. No one entered that driveway. Ever. Until the day an American associate named Donovan Pierce brought his foster daughter to a merger meeting, and everything Sang-soo thought he knew about monsters shattered in less than 60 seconds. Sang-soo Yeom never entered a room last. He moved like a rumor nobody dared question, sharp suit cutting through Seoul's cold morning light, dragon tattoos inked across his throat and wrists, glinting above his cuffs just long enough to remind everyone of their meaning. In his territory, a whole city block had learned to step soft and speak softer. Politicians lost his number, but not his face. Their assistants deleted call logs as an act of survival. Local business owners left envelopes on his table without a word. Even the rival gangs, men with fresh scars and old vendettas, checked for his name before they made a move. Wherever Sang-soo walked, respect bled from fear. But his most loyal lieutenant didn't speak. Goliath, the black cane corso that trailed him everywhere, was more myth than animal. Rumor said the beast had once been a champion in the concrete pits outside Incheon, snapping bones for the amusement of gamblers. Here was a 150-pound monster with jaws that could dent steel. They said Goliath had put 5 men in the ER, a bodyguard with a shattered forearm, a would-be assassin who lost 2 fingers, a brash debt collector savaged down an alley. The details shifted with each telling. What never changed was the lesson. You did not approach Sang-soo Yeom without his invitation, and nobody tried their luck with the dog twice. On a good day, Goliath paced beside Sang-soo like a sentry forged of muscle and rage, eyes burning slick and black. He left grooves in the marble by the front door and flecks of foam on the slate in the courtyard. The guards eyed him over their shoulders, even as they bowed to their boss. Some were men who'd served in the military, hardened by border skirmishes and riot shields. None of them mouthed off about the leash snapping once, or the blood Goliath's fangs had drawn from a rival who tried to sneak up the side path, one too many times. Sang-soo rewarded loyalty in the old ways. Thick envelopes for problems solved, silence for mistakes, a single nod that meant, "I see you." But he ruled by cultivating legend as much as threat. The legend was this: the dragon could crush you, and his beast would bury the remains. In the shadows of the Yeom estate, where laughter was rare and the windows all faced inward, Sang-soo's command was quiet, absolute. And by his side, every step was the reason even the bravest challengers thought carefully before crossing the line. Donovan Pierce had the kind of smile that didn't reach past his teeth. A dealer's grin, practiced and hollow, stretched across a face that had seen too many boardrooms and not enough honest daylight. He stepped out of the black SUV with his leather briefcase gripped tight, scanning the Yom compound like he was calculating square footage instead of reading the threat in every camera angle. Sang-soo watched from the second-floor balcony, arms crossed, expression carved from stone. The American was late, which meant disrespect. The American had also brought complications. The passenger door swung open. A tiny figure emerged, small hands gripping a worn backpack, tennis shoes scuffing against polished concrete. 8 years old, maybe younger, with cornrows pulled back tight and eyes that swept the estate without a word. Amanda. Donovan had mentioned her exactly once on the phone, a throwaway line about bringing his kid because the sitter canceled. Sang-soo had assumed negotiation tactic, some soft play to humanize a man who trafficked weapons through Manila. He hadn't expected this. She wore a bright yellow sundress, the kind with tiny daisies stitched along the hem, a burst of color that didn't belong anywhere near this fortress of black marble and armed silence. Against the gray walls and the men in tactical vests flanking the entrance, she looked like a canary dropped into a minefield. The guards shifted uncomfortably. One adjusted his earpiece, another glanced toward Sang-soo for direction that didn't come. Donovan barely looked at her. He muttered something, probably "stay close," and started up the steps. Already launching into his pitch about shipping routes and profit margins before he'd crossed the threshold. Amanda didn't follow. She stood in the driveway, backpack straps clutched in both fists, taking in the compound with the kind of quiet focus most adults never managed. She didn't fidget, didn't ask questions, just observed, absorbing every detail like she was cataloging exits or memorizing faces. Sang-soo descended the staircase slowly, footsteps deliberate on the polished stone. Donovan extended a hand. Sang-soo shook once, firm enough to make a point, then gestured toward the conference room where Ki-jun was already waiting with contracts and coffee nobody would drink. Business first. Always. But his eyes drifted back to the girl in the driveway. That splash of yellow against gunmetal and shadow, and something in his gut tightened. Not suspicion exactly, but awareness. She didn't belong here, which meant she was either bait or a mistake. Donovan droned on about percentages and timelines as they moved deeper into the mansion. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Sang-soo caught one last glimpse of Amanda. She'd wandered toward the courtyard's edge, drawn to something he couldn't see. Her head tilted slightly, listening. The bodyguards kept their distance, unsure whether to stop her or let her wander. And that little girl in the yellow dress was the biggest unknown to walk through his gates in years. The meeting started with the scrape of chairs, a terse exchange of business cards, and a cold round of coffee for the men who never drank it. Sang-soo took his usual seat at the head of the polished table. Fingers fanned like talons on the lacquer surface. Donovan pitched his numbers hard, voice rising and falling with a kind of forced cheer. But the tension was as thick as the Seoul summer outside, terms disputed, threats disguised as jokes, agreements teetering on the knife's edge. Ki-jun, ever the shadow behind Sang-soo's left shoulder, kept his eyes sharp for trouble. The words bounced around the room, growing sharper with every failed concession. Amanda sat near the doorway, legs swinging beneath her chair, her backpack resting against the wall. No one had spoken to her since arrival. No one even looked her direction as tempers simmered. The conference room, built for intimidation, pressed in. Black glass, steel beams, and walls thick enough to muffle shouting from the driveway. She counted the seconds between the pauses, observed every gesture, mapped every escape route. But the grown-ups lost themselves in their argument, voices blurring into static, promises slipping toward insults. She reached for the zipper on her bag, then paused. The muffled bark outside, a sound that cut clean through all the noise, made Amanda sit up straighter. A dog's low growl, maybe. Someone cursing in Korean, boots scraping stone. Her attention drifted from spreadsheets and threats to what lay beyond the tinted glass. One moment, she was still. The next, curiosity pulled her across the room. Amanda slid off her chair, backpack over one shoulder, and stole toward the side window, careful not to draw attention. The heated arguments behind her faded into a dull roar. She pressed her fingertips to the sill and peered out. Sang-soo was battling with something massive in the driveway. Veins taut, jacket abandoned for the struggle. The black dog lunged and twisted, all muscle, jaws wide enough to snap someone's hand clean through. Bodyguards kept their distance. Even Donovan's driver pretended to check his phone rather than intervene. Amanda didn't blink. She watched each move, the arc of the leash, the way Sang-soo braced his stance, the dog's dark silhouette against the morning light. Goliath stopped suddenly, turning his head as if he sensed eyes on him. For a second, Amanda felt a flash of recognition, a pulse beneath her ribs she couldn't name. Inside, the meeting boiled over. Tempers snapped. But Amanda was no longer listening. Her world had shrunk to a rectangle of glass, the figure of a Mafia boss wrangling a monster, and the realization that, out here, something wild was waiting to be noticed. Sang-soo needed air. The walls inside had started closing in, Donovan's voice grating like rust on steel, every word another demand wrapped in false respect. He'd excused himself without explanation, leaving Ki-jun to endure the American's endless pitch. Outside, the Seoul heat pressed down thick and merciless, but at least here he could breathe without choking on cheap cologne and cheaper lies. Goliath waited in the courtyard kennel, already agitated. The beast knew when tension spiked. He fed off it like gasoline on flame. Sang-soo grabbed the reinforced leash, military-grade nylon, triple-stitched, the only kind that lasted more than a week, and clipped it to the heavy collar. The dog lunged immediately, dragging him forward 3 steps before Sang-soo planted his heels and yanked back hard enough to make his shoulder scream. "Enough!" he growled in Korean, voice low and dangerous. Goliath didn't care. The cane corso twisted, snarling at shadows, snapping at air, muscles coiling beneath black fur like springs wound too tight. Every step was a battle. Sang-soo's knuckles went white around the leather grip. Sweat beaded along his temple. This wasn't a walk. This was war, the same struggle they waged every single day, neither one willing to submit. The guards on perimeter duty kept their distance, hands drifting toward their holsters out of habit. They'd seen what Goliath could do when the leash snapped. Nobody wanted to be the 6th trip to the ER. Sang-soo cursed under his breath, dragging the dog toward the driveway's far edge, where the concrete met gravel, and there was room to let the beast burn off some rage. But Goliath had other plans. He wheeled suddenly, jaws snapping inches from Sang-soo's wrist, foam flecking his muzzle. The crime lord jerked back, planting his weight, veins bulging along his forearms. Behind them, the heavy side door opened. Sang-soo didn't hear it over the dog's snarling and his own labored breathing. Didn't see the small figure slip through the gap, yellow dress bright against the mansion's gray facade. The guards stationed near the entrance were too far out of position, caught between watching their boss wrestle with the beast and monitoring the perimeter. By the time one of them noticed Amanda, she'd already cleared the steps. She moved with the kind of quiet certainty that children possess when they haven't yet learned to fear consequences. Her backpack bounced against her shoulders. Her tennis shoes made no sound on the polished stone. And her eyes, dark, focused, unblinking, locked onto the massive black dog thrashing against the leash 20 feet ahead. Sang-soo finally caught movement in his peripheral vision. He turned his head just enough to see her approaching, and his blood turned to ice. "Stop!" he started to shout. But Amanda kept walking. Time fractured. The world compressed into a single pinpoint of absolute terror. The girl, the dog, the space shrinking between them with every step she took. Sang-soo's mind screamed calculations. Too far to reach her, too risky to let go of the leash, too late to do anything but watch disaster unfold in slow motion. "Don't move!" he roared, voice cracking with something that might have been fear if he'd ever admitted to feeling it. Amanda stopped. But not because he'd commanded it. She stopped because she'd reached her destination. Standing directly in Goliath's path, close enough to touch. The dog's head snapped toward her, ears pinned back, lips peeling away from teeth designed to crush bone. That bone-deep growl rolled out from somewhere dark and ancient, a sound that bypassed logic and spoke directly to primal survival instincts. The guards finally moved, weapons half drawn, uncertain whether bullets would save the situation or make it catastrophically worse. Ki-jun appeared in the doorway, face drained of color. Even Donovan stumbled out behind him, frozen mid-sentence, realizing too late where his foster daughter had wandered. Goliath lunged. The leash went taut. Sang-soo pulled back with everything he had, boots skidding on stone. But the dog had found a target, and nothing, not pain, not commands, not years of brutal conditioning, would stop him now. He snapped forward again, jaws wide enough to swallow the girl's head whole, snapping the air 6 inches from her face with a sound like a bear trap closing. Amanda didn't scream, didn't flinch, didn't even blink. She stood perfectly still in her bright yellow dress, backpack clutched in both hands, staring into the eyes of the monster everyone else had learned to avoid. The beast coiled for another strike, muscles bunching, foam flying from his muzzle. Sang-soo's grip began to slip. The guards raised their weapons. Donovan finally found his voice, screaming his daughter's name. But Amanda just tilted her head slightly, studying the scars that crisscrossed Goliath's muzzle and neck. Old wounds, poorly healed, the kind that came from fighting in concrete pits where mercy didn't exist. And then, impossibly, she smiled. The snarl died in Goliath's throat. Not gradually, instantly, like someone had cut the power to a machine mid-cycle. The massive dog froze, muscles still coiled, breath coming in ragged huffs, but the rage that had burned in his eyes for years suddenly flickered and went out. His ears rotated forward, his head lowered slightly, confused. Amanda didn't move. She let the moment settle, let the beast's brain catch up to what his instincts already recognized. Then, slowly, so slowly the guards forgot to breathe, she reached out one small hand. "You're not bad," she whispered. Goliath's eyes tracked her fingers. The growl tried to restart, failed, came out as something closer to a whimper. Sang-soo felt the tension on the leash shift, change quality, transform from violent resistance into something he'd never felt before. Uncertainty. Amanda's hand touched the scarred bridge of Goliath's nose. The dog flinched, but didn't snap. Didn't retreat. Just stood there, trembling, as this tiny girl in a yellow dress traced the raised tissue of old wounds with the gentleness of someone who understood exactly where they'd come from. "You're just looking for me," she said, voice so soft only the dog could hear. And that's when it happened. Goliath's legs buckled. The 150-pound killing machine that had terrorized an entire criminal empire collapsed onto his belly like a switch had been thrown. His massive head dropped onto his paws, and from somewhere deep in his chest came a sound Sang-soo had never heard in 4 years of ownership. A high, broken whine, the kind puppies make when they're lost and scared and desperately searching for something familiar. Amanda knelt down, heedless of the foam and dirt, and placed both hands on either side of the dog's enormous head. Goliath pressed his face into her palms. His tail, scarred and crooked from being broken too many times, gave one tentative wag, then another, then couldn't stop. Sang-soo felt the leash go completely slack in his hands. The guards lowered their weapons slowly, eyes wide, brains struggling to process what they were witnessing. Ki-jun steadied himself against the doorframe. Donovan stood frozen on the steps, mouth open, question dying unasked. Because the girl in the yellow dress had just done what no trainer, no punishment, no amount of fear or force had ever accomplished. She'd made the monster remember he'd once been something else. Amanda's hands moved slowly toward her backpack, fingers sliding along the worn canvas straps. Every eye in the courtyard locked onto that movement, guards tightening their grips on holstered weapons, Ki-jun taking an involuntary step forward, Donovan frozen somewhere between confusion and rising panic. Even Goliath's massive head tracked the motion, ears swiveling forward, nostrils flaring. Sang-soo's mind raced through possibilities. Food. She had to have food in there. Treats, maybe jerky or biscuits, something that explained why the dog hadn't already torn her apart. That made sense. That was logical. Dogs responded to food when nothing else worked. He'd tried every high-value reward known to animal behaviorists: premium cuts, raw liver, imported cheeses. None of it had made a dent in Goliath's aggression. But maybe this girl knew something he didn't. The backpack's zipper hissed open, a sound that somehow cut through the thick Seoul afternoon like a blade. Amanda reached inside, her expression impossibly calm, almost reverent. The guards shifted their stances. One whispered urgent Korean into his radio. Another took 3 steps closer, hand fully on his sidearm now. What she pulled out made everyone freeze. Not food, not treats. A ribbon. Old, filthy, the kind of fabric that had once been bright blue, but had faded to something closer to gray. Frayed edges, stained with dirt and what might have been blood. One end was knotted, the other torn. The thing looked like it belonged in a trash bin, not in a little girl's backpack. Certainly not in the hands of someone facing down 150 pounds of pure violence. Sang-soo felt something cold slide down his spine. This wasn't a training tool. This was something else. Something that didn't make sense, but somehow made all the sense in the world. Goliath's reaction was immediate and visceral. His entire body went rigid. The low growl building in his chest cut off mid-rumble. His black eyes fixed on the ribbon with an intensity that bordered on desperate, pupils dilating, every muscle locked in place like someone had hit pause on reality. Amanda held the ribbon out, letting it dangle from her fingertips. The fabric twisted slowly in the breeze, catching the light. It meant nothing to the guards. Meant nothing to Donovan or Ki-jun or any of the hardened criminals watching this impossible scene unfold. But to Goliath, it was everything. The beast's nose lifted, scenting the air. His scarred mouth opened slightly. Not in aggression, but in something that looked disturbingly like recognition. A soft, wounded sound escaped his throat. Not quite a whine, not quite a whimper, but something caught between both. His front legs trembled, and for the first time since Sang-soo had known him, Goliath looked afraid. The massive dog's legs buckled. Not gradually, not with the slow resignation of submission training, but all at once. Like every bone in his body had suddenly forgotten how to support weight. Goliath dropped to his belly, paws splayed, that enormous head lowering until his scarred muzzle pressed against the concrete. The impact sent a tremor through the driveway. His nose stretched forward, desperate, inhaling the scent of that filthy ribbon with the kind of raw need that transcended animal instinct. Sang-soo watched the dog's entire body quivered, watched muscles built for violence turn liquid with something that looked horrifyingly like grief. Then Goliath began to cry. Not bark, not growl, cry. High, broken sounds that no 150-pound war machine should be capable of making. The kind of whimpering that puppies made when separated from their mothers, when the world was too big and too cold, and they were searching for something warm to anchor them. Each sound tore from deep in his chest, pitched with a desperation that made the guards lower their weapons not from command, but from sheer instinctive discomfort. Ki-jun's hand fell away from his earpiece. Donovan took an unconscious step backward. Even the stone-faced bodyguards who'd seen men tortured and empires toppled found themselves looking away from the spectacle of this supposedly invincible beast completely unraveling. Sang-soo felt the leash go completely slack in his hands. His knuckles, which had been white with strain moments ago, relaxed. There was no need to hold on anymore. Goliath wasn't going anywhere. The dog had collapsed into himself, front paws now covering his eyes like a child trying to hide from a nightmare. That awful whining punctuated by hitched breaths that sounded disturbingly human. Amanda stood over him, ribbon still dangling from her small fingers, watching with an expression that held no triumph. Only sadness. Only understanding. She'd known this would happen. Somehow, impossibly, she'd known exactly what that piece of fabric would do. The crying intensified. Goliath's entire body shook with it now, ribs heaving, that massive frame convulsing with sobs that shouldn't exist in an animal bred for combat. His tail, scarred and crooked from a lifetime of being broken, curled tight against his hindquarters, making him look smaller somehow, vulnerable in a way that made the most hardened criminals in the compound feel deeply, uncomfortably wrong for witnessing it. Sang-soo realized his own breathing had gone shallow. His chest felt tight. He'd spent 4 years with this beast, had seen him tear through steel and draw blood from anyone foolish enough to get close. But he'd never seen this. Never imagined it was possible. The dog wasn't just remembering something. He was mourning. Amanda dropped to her knees, heedless of the concrete or the foam still flecking Goliath's muzzle, or the very real danger everyone else still perceived. She wrapped both arms around the massive head, pulling it against her small chest, and the beast let her. More than that, he pressed into her embrace like he was trying to disappear into it, trying to crawl back to somewhere safe he'd lost years ago. "I missed you too," she whispered against his scarred ear. Sang-soo felt the world tilt sideways. Those words carried weight he didn't understand but couldn't deny. This wasn't a training breakthrough. This wasn't some lucky accident with treats and timing. This was recognition. This was reunion. This was two souls who'd been ripped apart finding each other again against impossible odds. Goliath's crying softened, but didn't stop. His massive body curled around Amanda's small frame, protective and desperate, like he was afraid she might vanish if he loosened his grip even slightly. His tail began to wag, slowly at first, then faster, thumping against the concrete with rhythmic thuds that sounded like a heartbeat returning to life. The guards finally lowered their guns completely. Weapons clattered back into holsters, hands fell away from radios, tactical postures melted into bewildered stillness. Ki-jun exhaled a breath he'd been holding since this entire impossible scene began. Donovan stumbled forward, mouth opening and closing, trying to find words for something that had no words. But Sang-soo remained frozen, leash dangling from his fingers, staring at the little girl in the yellow dress who'd just accomplished what 4 years of dominance training, punishment, rewards, and professional intervention had never achieved. She'd made Goliath remember he wasn't just a weapon, wasn't just rage wrapped in muscle and scars. He'd once been someone's companion, someone's protector, someone's reason to be gentle, and that someone was holding him now, stroking the damaged tissue on his muzzle, humming something too soft for anyone else to hear. Goliath's eyes, those black, burning eyes that had struck terror into seasoned criminals, were closed, face pressed against her shoulder, body finally, completely at peace. Amanda looked up and met Sang-soo's gaze across the driveway. No challenge in her expression, no triumph, just a quiet, devastating certainty that said she'd always known this moment would come. Had been searching for it, maybe, through foster homes and strange cities and situations no 8-year-old should have to navigate. The Dragon of Seoul had no words. For the first time in a decade of ruthless control and calculated violence, Sang-soo stood silent, watching an impossible truth rewrite everything he thought he understood about loyalty, memory, and what it meant to truly own someone's heart. Donovan's brain finally caught up to what his eyes had been witnessing. He broke from his frozen stance on the steps, legs moving before logic could stop them, charging across the driveway with the kind of panic that only parents understand. His leather shoes slapped concrete, breath coming in ragged gasps, hands already reaching. "Amanda, get away from—" He grabbed her shoulder, yanking her backward with enough force to nearly lift her off the ground. The ribbon slipped from her fingers, and Goliath's entire demeanor shifted, like someone had flipped a switch from gentle to lethal in half a heartbeat. The growl that erupted from the beast's throat wasn't the broken whimpering from moments ago. This was pure, focused threat, a bass rumble that vibrated through bones and triggered every primal warning the human brain possessed. Goliath surged to his feet, those massive jaws snapping inches from Donovan's wrist, eyes locked on the man who'd dared to touch his person. "Goliath, down!" Sang-soo's command cut through the tension, sharp and automatic. The dog ignored him completely, planted himself between Amanda and Donovan like a wall of muscle and rage, hackles raised, teeth bared. But when Amanda pressed her small hand against his scarred shoulder, whispering something too soft for anyone else to hear, Goliath went still. Didn't retreat. Didn't lower his guard. Just stopped advancing, attention split between the threat and the girl behind him. Donovan stumbled backward, face drained of color, finally understanding that whatever was happening here went far beyond a lucky interaction with a dangerous animal. The bodyguards moved in tighter, hands on weapons, waiting for direction from their boss that didn't come. Because Sang-soo couldn't move, couldn't speak. His mind was racing through the past 4 years, every failed training session, every attack, every moment Goliath had proven utterly untamable. The dog had never obeyed him, never showed loyalty to anyone, never displayed affection or recognition or anything resembling normal canine behavior. Until 30 seconds ago, when a little girl in a yellow dress had pulled a dirty ribbon from her backpack and made the monster remember something Sang-soo didn't know existed. The dog knows her. The thought landed like a punch to the gut. This wasn't coincidence. Wasn't luck. Goliath recognized Amanda, had been waiting for her maybe, beneath all that rage and violence, which meant there was history here, a connection that predated Sang-soo's ownership, predated the gift from the Russian arms dealer, predated everything he thought he understood. "Ki-jun," Sang-soo's voice came out rough, strained. "Background check. On the girl, on the dog. Everything from before he came to me. I want it in 1 hour." His head of security nodded once, already pulling out his phone, fingers flying across the screen. The kind of deep-dive investigation that could unearth buried records, sealed files, connections that people paid good money to keep hidden. Because something impossible had just happened in Sang-soo's courtyard. And the Dragon of Seoul didn't believe in miracles. 53 minutes later, Ki-jun set the manila folder on Sang-soo's desk with careful precision that indicated explosive contents. The office was empty, except for the two of them. Guards stationed outside, Donovan and Amanda sequestered in a guest room, Goliath pacing the courtyard like he was guarding something sacred. Sang-soo opened the file and felt the ground shift. 3 years ago. August. A concrete warehouse on the outskirts of Incheon, disguised as an auto repair shop. Sang-soo remembered that night, rival gang running operations on his territory. He'd gone in personally with 15 men to send a message. They'd expected weapons, maybe drugs. What they'd found was worse. The report laid it out in cold language. A dog-fighting ring. 37 dogs chained in makeshift kennels, blood-stained concrete, betting slips. Sang-soo had shut it down. Sent the operators to the hospital and the dogs to rescue organizations. Except one. The champion. A 2-year-old Can Corso with a bite record that made rescue workers refuse to approach. Scarred, aggressive, feral. Considered too dangerous to rehabilitate. Sang-soo had taken him as a trophy. That was Goliath. But there was more. A footnote buried in supplementary documentation. Authorities discovered a mute female child, approximately 5 years old, living in the kennel area. Child exhibited signs of severe neglect, but no physical abuse. Appeared to have been feeding the dogs scraps, possibly for several months. Foster services contacted. Child removed to protective custody. Sang-soo's hands went numb. A 5-year-old girl, living with the fighting dogs, feeding them, surviving alongside them in that hellscape. Ki-jun cleared his throat. The dates match. Amanda entered foster care August 14th, 3 years ago. Same day as the raid. She was mute for 18 months after removal. The pieces slammed together. Amanda had been there. In that warehouse, living in darkness with dogs bred to kill, and somehow she'd survived by becoming family. And Goliath, the most dangerous of them all, had protected her. The ribbon. That filthy blue ribbon she'd pulled from her backpack. Probably hers from before. Some small comfort she'd brought into that nightmare, something she'd maybe tied around Goliath's neck when he was still young enough to remember softness. Sang-soo closed the file, leaned back, stared at nothing. For 3 years, he'd owned the dog who'd been this child's only family, and she'd been out there somewhere, moving through foster homes and strange cities, carrying a ribbon and searching. Until today, when impossible chance had brought them back together. The dinner invitation surprised Donovan. Business deals didn't conclude with hospitality in Sang-soo's world. But when the Dragon of Seoul extended the offer personally, refusal wasn't an option. The meal was simple: grilled meat, rice, soup steaming in ceramic bowls. Amanda sat across from Sang-soo, occasionally glancing toward the windows where Goliath paced the courtyard. The dog hadn't left his post, wearing a groove in the stone with obsessive patrol. "He can come in," Sang-soo said finally. Donovan opened his mouth to protest. Ki-jun's hand moved toward his sidearm, but Amanda was already standing, crossing to the door, pulling it open. Goliath entered like he'd been waiting his entire life, moved directly to Amanda's side, pressed his massive body against her legs, calm, protective, at peace. No aggression, no snarling, just a dog being what dogs were meant to be, loyal. Sang-soo watched them throughout the meal, watched Amanda slip bits of meat to Goliath, watched the beast's tail wag slowly, contentedly, watched her small hand rest on his scarred head, the way his eyes tracked her every movement with devotion that bordered on religious. After Donovan had been dismissed with Ki-jun, Sang-soo found himself alone with the girl and the dog. "You can visit," he said quietly. "Whenever you want. For as long as you need." She didn't smile, didn't thank him. Just nodded once, understanding this wasn't kindness. It was acknowledgement of a bond that transcended ownership. That night, after they'd departed, Sang-soo stood on his balcony watching Goliath pace the driveway. The beast was restless again, but different, not violent, just waiting, guarding the memory of her presence. Ki-jun appeared beside him. "I spent 4 years trying to break him," Sang-soo said finally. "Thought that's how you built loyalty, through dominance, through being the biggest threat in the room." He watched Goliath settle near the spot where Amanda had knelt. But she just loved him. 3 years ago, in that hell. She was 5 years old and surrounded by monsters, and she just loved him anyway. Fed him. Tied a ribbon around his neck. Made him remember he was more than what they tried to turn him into. The Dragon of Seoul learned something that night that no violence could teach. The strongest thing in the world isn't fear. It's memory. It's the quiet way a heart refuses to forget who it belonged to, even when everything else gets stripped away. It's a little girl in a yellow dress and a monster who remembered her kindness through 3 years of separation and became gentle the moment she whispered his name. Loyalty can't be beaten into someone. It can only be earned by the kind of love that survives darkness and waits patiently for light to return.